Tokyo, October 1971. A private dojo hidden behind ancient cedar trees in the Shibuya district, where the city's noise dissolved into near silence. No signs, no advertisements, no indication that anything significant happened within those weathered wooden walls. Just a wooden gate that opened only when someone knocked in a specific pattern, and a narrow stone path leading to a training hall that had existed for over a century. That night, two of Japan's most dangerous women with swords walked into that hall and faced a man with nothing but his bare hands. What happened in the next 7 minutes would be whispered about for decades, not because someone won or lost, but because what Bruce Lee demonstrated permanently shattered the assumption that a weapon always defeats an empty hand. The dojo interior carried the weight of generations. Wooden floors polished to a mirror finish by decades of bare feet. Paper screens filtering lamplight into something soft and ancient. The smell of cedar and old incense layered over a century of sword practice. At one end, a small alcove contained ancestral scrolls so old the ink had faded to the color of dried blood. Violence had been practiced here for 100 years, and that history had accumulated in the walls like moisture seeping into stone. Bruce Lee stood near the entrance, hands empty, breathing slow and controlled. He was 30 years old, lean and precise, every line of his body suggesting efficiency rather than excess. He wore simple black training clothes, no shoes, no jewelry, nothing that could slow him down or give an opponent something to grab. He had come to Tokyo through channels that required trust built over years. A martial arts historian named Takeda, who had spent 4 decades documenting combat systems outside public knowledge, had arranged the encounter 3 months earlier with a proposition that bordered on extraordinary. There were 2 women, Takeda had explained, sisters, both trained in niten ichi-ryū, a 2-sword technique that predated most modern Japanese martial arts by centuries. The elder was Akiko Murakami, 44, who had inherited the family dojo and trained in the style since childhood. The younger was Yuki Murakami, 38, whose speed with a sword had become legendary in circles that never appeared in newspapers. Both had studied Bruce Lee's philosophy and reached the same conclusion independently. What they could do with katana represented something no unarmed man, regardless of his skill, could survive. They wanted to prove it. Bruce had spent 2 weeks thinking before accepting. Not because he doubted himself, because he understood what 2 katana meant in skilled hands. A sword extended reach, speed, and killing potential in ways that fundamentally altered the mathematics of combat. 2 swords, wielded by 2 women who had trained together their entire lives, created geometric patterns of blade movement that seemed to leave no gaps, no openings, no path to safety. The challenge fascinated him precisely because it seemed impossible. And Bruce Lee had never walked away from something that seemed impossible. 8 people were present that night. Takeda, who would observe and translate. Wong, Bruce's associate from Hong Kong, serving as witness. 2 of the Murakami sisters' senior students, both women in their 30s, whose presence carried the quiet authority of people who had trained under exceptional teachers. And 4 others whose exact affiliations remained deliberately unclear, though their bearings suggested connections to organizations that preferred to remain unnamed. All 8 understood that what was about to occur existed outside normal channels. Akiko Murakami entered first through a side door at the far end of the dojo, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. She simply walked in, and the quality of the air changed. She was 5'4", perhaps 125 pounds, slender in a way that suggested generations of discipline rather than genetics. Her hair was pulled back severely, Her face carried lines that mapped 40 years of daily practice. She wore a plain black training gi and moved with the unhurried precision of someone who had mastered every inch of the space she occupied. She lifted one katana from a wooden rack near the entrance, held in her right hand, the blade resting against her forearm. She stood still for a moment, and even with one sword, she commanded the room's attention completely. Then Yuki entered. Where Akiko carried authority through stillness, Yuki carried it through energy. She was 3 inches taller, broader in the shoulders, her body carrying the dense, functional muscle of someone whose conditioning matched her technical skill. Her face was younger, but harder, the expression of someone who had been tested repeatedly and never once been found wanting. She moved with a quality that martial artists called killing intent. Not aggression, exactly, but a focused readiness that made the air around her feel charged, dangerous. She lifted the second katana. Her grip adjusted with a subtle rotation of her wrist, and the sword became part of her arm. Her eyes found Bruce across the dojo and held them with an expression that carried no hostility but absolute certainty. She believed what was about to happen. She had no doubt whatsoever. Takeda stepped forward. The confrontation will proceed in stages. First, Ms. Akiko Murakami will face Mr. Lee individually. Then Ms. Yuki Murakami will face him individually. Finally, if both parties agree, the sisters will face Mr. Lee together. Mr. Lee has no weapon. Both women will use full capability. The objective is demonstration, not injury. Any questions? No one spoke. Then please, take your positions. Akiko moved to the center of the dojo with the deliberate grace of someone performing a ritual she had performed thousands of times. Bruce walked to meet her, stopping approximately 10 feet away. A katana blade measured 30 inches. Akiko's reach with the sword extended her effective striking range to nearly 5 feet. Bruce's reach with bare hands was perhaps 22 inches. The gap between their capabilities seemed insurmountable. For several seconds, neither moved. Akiko held her sword in a position that centuries of tradition had refined into something approaching geometric perfection. Blade angled forward, tip aimed at Bruce's center mass, her body balanced and coiled. Bruce stood with his hands loose at his sides. No guard, no visible preparation. To anyone unfamiliar with martial arts, he looked unprepared. To the 8 witnesses who understood what they were seeing, he looked like something else entirely. A weapon at rest. Akiko moved first, not rushing. She flowed forward with a speed that seemed impossible for her frame, her body generating velocity through mechanics refined over 40 years. Her sword cut horizontally, a clean arc moving through the air with a sound like tearing silk, aimed at Bruce's midsection. A strike that would have opened him completely if it connected. Bruce's body rotated. His torso turned perpendicular to the strike, letting the blade pass across the space where his front had been a fraction of a second earlier. The sword cut only air. Akiko recovered and struck again. A vertical cut aimed at his head, following the horizontal strike with timing that left almost no gap. Bruce dropped his level, lowering his center of gravity by 8 inches. The blade split the air where his head had been. The 8 witnesses stood frozen, their bodies tensing with the primal response that humans have experienced since the first time a blade threatened human flesh. This was not sport. This was not performance. 2 people were operating at the absolute edge of what human beings could do, and the margin between survival and death was measured in fractions of inches. Akiko attacked again, and again, and again. Her sword created a continuous pattern of blade movement that surrounded Bruce with lethal geometry. each technique executed with the precision of someone who had practiced the same movements 10,000 times. Each one missed by margins that seemed impossibly small. 2 minutes passed. Akiko had launched perhaps 40 strikes. None had connected. Bruce had not counterattacked once. He had simply moved through the blade patterns, studying them, learning their rhythm, mapping the micro-gaps between strikes. Then, in a single fluid motion, he stepped inside Akiko's guard as her sword overextended on a horizontal cut and delivered a palm strike to her shoulder. Brief contact. Controlled force. Enough to demonstrate that the opening existed, that in a fight with lethal intent, that contact would have ended it. Akiko lowered her sword slowly and bowed, not the formal bow of a student, a deeper bow, the bow of someone who had just learned something important. Bruce returned it with equal depth. The dojo was completely silent. 8 people breathed carefully, aware that the first confrontation had ended and the second was about to begin. Yuki Murakami stepped forward. If Akiko had been water, Yuki was fire. She moved to the center with an intensity that made the air feel compressed, charged with something volatile. Her sword hung lower than her sister's, more aggressive. The grip suggested she intended to use the blade not just as a cutting weapon, but as an impact tool at close range, where precision mattered less than speed and force. Bruce watched her approach with the same calm he had worn before facing Akiko. But those who knew him noticed something different. His breathing had changed. Deeper, more deliberate. He was preparing for something more dangerous. Yuki didn't wait for stillness. She attacked immediately with explosive speed that made Akiko's approach look measured. Her sword cut in a fundamentally different pattern. Where Akiko used geometry, Yuki used speed, generating so much blade movement that individual strikes blurred into a continuous threat. It wasn't about where the sword was. It was about where it could be in the next fraction of a second. Bruce moved differently than he had against Akiko. Faster. More urgently. His body twisted and shifted with desperate precision, finding paths between blades that seemed to close faster than any human should navigate. Yuki's sword passed his face once, close enough to ruffle his hair. Twice, her blade changed direction mid-strike, adjusting to his evasion, hunting him with intelligence, rather than following a predetermined pattern. She was adapting in real time, learning from her sister's failure. Every time Bruce moved, Yuki adjusted her next strike to cut off that escape route. She was hurting him, using the sword to control space, reducing his options with each passing second. It was brilliant, and it was nearly working. Bruce felt the pressure increasing. The gaps were closing. Her speed was genuinely exceptional, faster than anything he had faced, and the aggression of her approach left him less time to study and more time simply surviving. For the first time, his defense was reactive rather than analytical. Then he did something unexpected. He moved toward her, not away from the sword, toward it, closing the distance that Yuki's technique depended on. At close range, the katana's length became a liability. The weapon needed space to generate cutting power. Bruce was eliminating that space deliberately. Yuki recognized what he was doing and tried to compensate, shortening her grip. But Bruce was already inside her guard. His hand caught her sword arm at the wrist, not grabbing, just redirecting, using the momentum of her own strike to guide the blade past him. In the same motion, his other hand struck her solar plexus with a punch that traveled less than 6 inches, but carried enough force to stop her completely. Yuki stumbled backward, the air leaving her lungs in a single explosive breath. Bruce released her wrist and stepped back. His expression carried no triumph, simply acknowledgement that the demonstration was complete. Yuki straightened, breathing hard. Blood had appeared at the corner of her mouth. She wiped it with the back of her hand and looked at Bruce with an expression that had shifted fundamentally. The certainty was gone. In its place was recognition, the same recognition her sister had shown, colored with Yuki's particular intensity. She bowed, deeper than Akiko had bowed. Bruce returned it. Takeda's voice broke the silence. The sisters discussed the possibility of a combined confrontation before tonight. Both swords, together against Mr. Lee simultaneously. Do both parties wish to proceed? Bruce looked at the two sisters. They looked at each other. Something passed between them that required no words, the silent communication of people who had trained together their entire lives. Akiko nodded once. Yuki's jaw tightened, and she nodded as well. Then please take your positions. The two sisters moved to the center and assumed a formation that told Bruce everything he needed to know. This wasn't improvised. This was a coordinated system. Two swords moving in patterns refined through years of joint training, designed to create situations where a single defender faced threats from multiple directions with no possible way to address all of them at once. Akiko took position slightly to Bruce's left, Yuki slightly to his right. Close enough that their swords created overlapping threat zones, far enough apart that Bruce couldn't address both by facing a single direction. The geometry was elegant, brutal, precisely calculated to make defense impossible. Bruce stood between them, his bare hands at his sides, and breathed. The sisters attacked together, not simultaneously. Their swords moved in a coordinated pattern, one strike creating a response that the other exploited. Akiko's horizontal cut forced Bruce to rotate. The rotation opened his left side. Yuki's blade was already moving toward that opening before Bruce had finished the evasion. It was seamless, devastating. Bruce moved. His body dropped and twisted simultaneously, a movement so economical it seemed to violate the laws of physics. Akiko's blade passed over his head. Yuki's blade cut the air where his left side had been. Neither connected, but both were close. Closer than anything before. The sisters pressed forward, maintaining formation, their swords creating continuous patterns that surrounded Bruce from both sides. Akiko's strikes flowed into Yuki's strikes, flowed back into Akiko's. The rhythm was hypnotic, deadly, and seemingly without gaps. The 8 witnesses watched with expressions ranging from awe to fear. Understanding, they were seeing the absolute limit of what 2 skilled swordspeople could achieve against a single unarmed opponent. Bruce moved through it. Not easily. His body was working at maximum capability, every fraction of his speed engaged. But he was moving through it, finding paths the sisters' technique hadn't accounted for, reading not just individual strikes, but the relationship between the 2 swords, the way one created openings for the other, the way they compensated for each other's weaknesses. Then he saw it. The gap. Not in space, but in time. A fraction of a second where both swords were in transition, where neither blade occupied the space Bruce needed. It lasted perhaps 1/5 of a second. It was enough. Bruce stepped forward into the gap with explosive speed. His right hand struck Akiko's sword arm at the elbow, a precise hit that caused her grip to loosen involuntarily. Her sword dropped and clattered against the wooden floor, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. Simultaneously, his left hand caught Yuki's sword at the flat of the blade, redirecting the strike aimed at his neck, using her own momentum to guide it past him. In the same motion, He stepped inside Yuki's guard and placed his palm flat against her sternum, pushing gently but firmly. Yuki stumbled backward 2 steps. Not from force, from the shock of the contact, the sudden awareness that Bruce's hand was touching her chest, that he had penetrated a defense she had spent her entire life building. Both swords were no longer threats, one on the floor, one redirected past its target. 2 of Japan's most dangerous sword practitioners had been neutralized by bare hands in less than 3 seconds. The dojo was absolutely silent. Bruce stepped back slowly, his hands dropping to his sides. His expression carried no triumph, no arrogance. He simply looked at the 2 sisters with genuine respect. Akiko picked up her sword. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked at Bruce. Something fundamental had changed in her eyes. Not defeat, understanding. Yuki's expression carried something different. Intensity. The focused quality of someone who had just encountered a truth they couldn't ignore. Both sisters bowed simultaneously, the deepest bow either had ever given. Bruce returned it with equal depth and sincerity. Takeda broke the silence quietly. Perhaps you would all be willing to share what happened tonight. Akiko spoke first, her voice steady. Takeda translated, "My father taught me that the sword was the highest expression of combat, that a blade in skilled hands could defeat anything. Tonight I learned that this belief was incomplete. Mr. Lee did not defeat our swords. He found the spaces between them, spaces we believed did not exist. The sword extends the body, but it also extends the mind's dependence on a tool. We forgot to develop what our bodies could do without them." Yuki spoke next, her voice harder. Takeda translated, "I am not finished learning from tonight. What Mr. Lee demonstrated is not something I can understand completely in one evening, but I understand enough to know that everything I believed about the relationship between weapon and warrior needs to be examined again, from the beginning." Bruce listened to both before speaking, his voice carrying the same calm precision it always did. "What these 2 women can do with swords is extraordinary. 40 years and 38 years of refinement. The coordination between them represents something that took decades to develop. I have enormous respect for what they have achieved." He paused, looking at both sisters with genuine admiration. "But tonight, I learned something as well. The greatest danger was never the swords. It was my own assumption that 2 swords made the situation impossible. The moment I accepted that assumption, I would have been defeated. The moment I rejected it and focused on finding the truth of what was actually happening, the swords became just another pattern to read." He looked at Akiko, then at Yuki. "You are both exceptional, but the weapon is always secondary. The warrior is always primary. Tonight, we all learned where our understanding needs to grow." The 8 witnesses stood in silence as the 3 martial artists bowed one final time. Outside, Tokyo continued its endless movement. Millions of people living without any knowledge of what had just occurred in a small dojo behind cedar trees in Shibuya. Inside, 8 people had witnessed something most of them would carry for the rest of their lives. Bruce Lee left the dojo the same way he had entered. Quietly, without ceremony. His hands empty, just as they had been when he arrived. Behind him, 2 women stood in a century-old dojo, holding swords their family had carried for generations, understanding for the first time that the weapon had never been the point. The real weapon had been standing in front of them all along, with nothing but bare hands and the ability to see truth where others saw only impossibility.